When I was in college in the 1980s, G. Gordon Liddy was booked at our campus lecture hall. Liddy had just spent nearly 52 months in federal prison for conspiracy, burglary, and illegal wiretapping for his role as the chief architect of the Watergate break-in, and for refusing to testify before the Senate committee investigating Watergate back in the halcyon days when government officials actually went to jail for breaking the law. By the Reagan era of the 80s, he had done his time and was out and about trying to reestablish himself as a public speaker and an authority of sorts. I really don't know on what, but there he was at my school, the former FBI operative and New York State prosecutor, the guy who'd planned the Watergate break-in, ostensibly to protect Richard Nixon's political ambitions, and he had gotten caught. My political science professor at this very conservative private institution of higher learning deep in the heart of Texas had strongly recommended that we attend the lecture and write about it. So I went with a group of fellow theater majors. The college had a good theater program. The most promising of us in the department were on a scholarship. There was no way we could have afforded that costly education without it, and I was notably among the last people the state of Texas ever gave a full ride to that university. This is all by way of saying that I would never, not in a million years, have sought out a lecture by G. Gordon Liddy otherwise. But rich Southern white conservatives were different than me. He was just their cup of tea. One of my professors, who was also a dean, summed it up perfectly when I'd asked her how the school had weathered the counterculture storms of the 1960s. Without a hint of either shame or irony, she matter-of-factly said that the 60s had passed by little noticed, leaving the campus essentially unscathed. Even at 21, this pretty much clarified to me that these people were not my tribe. In all his recalling of why he was who he was that night, and in every interview and all the biographical reporting over the decades since, Liddy unapologetically waved his freak flag. He described his childhood as a constant secret agony of fear and shame. This is a guy whose boyhood hero was Adolf Hitler. He quoted his German nanny. "The Führer had lifted her nation out of weakness to extraordinary strength." Liddy very specifically talked about perceiving his own fear as weakness he had conquered. Suffering, he said, that was the key. Whatever the consequences of what I do, I must accept and endure them, outlast suffering to achieve my goals. G. Gordon Liddy was not sheepish about telling crowds of people about overcoming his childhood fear of rats by catching one, roasting it over an open flame, and eating it. The meat was tasteless and stringy, Liddy said. I smiled as I thought occurred to me. From now on, rats would fear me as they feared cats. After all, I ate them too. He confirmed an incident that had been, by then, mythologized about how he had held his hand over an open flame until he was severely burned, to prove his commitment to some endeavor. He said, since my will was so strong, I could endure a long, deep, flesh-charring burn without a flicker of expression. Details were unimportant to Liddy. All that mattered to him, and that ever matters to sociopaths of his ilk, was and is that we all know, every last one of us, that his tool is the biggest tool in the room. The veracity of that story, who knows? Liddy also copped to having remained a Nixon devotee, who, like the current Attorney General William Barr, was invested in the absolute power of the office of the President. He unflinchingly maintained that the only thing he, or Nixon, had done wrong was get caught. Liddy was clearly a bad guy. I left afterwards fully aware that this was a guy who would just as soon kill me as look at me if it served his purpose. But the point is, I left. I was in a space with a nasty motherfucker, and I was able to listen, appraise the situation, and walk away. I did not take my privileged white outrage at being forced to be in the presence of that sick fuck to the university administration, demanding they disinvite G. Gordon Liddy to speak on campus. Nor did I require them to provide me a safe, well-lit closet to hide in and stew in my own self-satisfied juices. Furthermore, if I am being honest, I'd have to admit that over the years, as I've faced some lethal threats from some sociopaths and other strangers, I've grown to respect some aspects of G. Gordon Liddy's character. For instance, he knew exactly who he was, he knew he'd made a deal with the devil, and he owned the consequences. The karma, if you will. I find I am a lot like that, and that I like that about myself. I am very clear about the choices I make. I know not everyone will be receptive, and if I am saying what I mean, I really don't care much what reactive personalities think about that. In the end, when it all comes due, I have only to answer to God as I know it and myself, and I'm okay with that. So is G. Gordon Liddy. Who knew? Buddhist axiom. When you have an extreme reaction to any figure outside yourself, you are reacting to something unacknowledged and unhealed within yourself. If you address that within yourself, it will not be so terrifying when confronting its projection in the sentient world. The fact that so many people are violently hostile to the simplest perceived online slight, often by people they do not even know, means there's a lot of psychic disarray within them slamming up against its virtual manifestations out there. Many colleges are creating safe spaces for students who don't want to be confronted by people who might ideologically differ from whatever narrow narratives they've attached themselves to, by validating and reinforcing their fear of the other. Institutions of higher learning are failing in the fundamental aspect of preparing students for the world. So what if you don't like a speaker? It will not kill you to listen to some evil motherfucker like G. Gordon Liddy. Then at least you know who you might be dealing with out there in the world. More importantly, you might find out some things about the way he or she thinks that will be useful to you in the future. Evil genius is still genius. But what students, administrators, and parents are doing by making it seem normal for kids to simply not do anything they don't fucking like is infantilizing them. These nurturers are teaching them that they are not capable enough or strong enough to confront adversity without going completely to pieces. They must seek comfort, a quiet place to hide until the danger of differing ideas passes, or they overreact emotionally in the extreme to protect themselves. They are perpetually terrified at their core, internalizing that and carrying it with them as their default setting. Never mind not having to develop a more nuanced perspective, the ability to prioritize, to know what warrants a degree of attention and response, and which things just don't matter that much. Young people are coming at absolutely everything, whether large or small, with a friend or a disembodied stranger online in a dark basement, with the same level of utter confusion and contempt. That depletes their life energy, and they don't have an off switch. We live in a world where pretty much anybody younger than their early 40s, and generally middle class and white, was raised believing the world revolves around them, that they were special boys and girls destined to lead, but never taught how. Far too many not so young anymore people also can't listen to differing views, not as varied perspectives born from individual experiences, but as imminent threats to their very being. Most have gotten this far in life without having joined the military or worked in an institutional hierarchy in which they have to answer to some seasoned professionals or develop strategical thinking for bringing people together and leading, where they have to compromise. They live as if the choice is binary. There is no gray area. Only there is. The world is a vast spectrum of nothing but degrees of gray area. Buddhist axiom: nothing is either good nor bad, but thinking makes it so. Your opinions, your life is just the story you are telling yourself. It is not who you are. Choose your story carefully. Earlier this week, I wrote a piece addressing an unfortunate incident involving daily cause. The premise here is essentially the larger cultural aspect of what I addressed politically in that article. These self-identified progressives at Daily Cause et al. Are the social media equivalent of the same infantilizing intellectual safe spaces that many colleges are promoting as the new normal. These coddled, middle-class, suburban white kids often go from their parents' home, where they've been kept from all manner of perceived danger and accountability, babysat by the most dangerous predator of all, their iPhones. Then they're shipped off to a college where they are insulated from the ideological meanies who dare to have a different opinion. Finally, to their own little apartment where they tell themselves that the bubble of progressive pals and pundits that they chat with in the dark amount to actual human contact. Then they think, without any introspection at all, that the terror they feel every time they are confronted with the other is the appropriate way to feel, that their childish reactions are the way one is supposed to deal with actual flesh and blood human beings. That never was and never will be normal. And it is a dangerous place from which people who now run businesses, teach children, write laws, to function. A dangerously uninformed place for adults now identifying themselves as journalists of sorts to write from. They manage to avoid and deny accountability by dumbing down their role, calling themselves bloggers. They mistakenly think that makes them less culpable when they burn down somebody else's life. Not my fault, I'm just a blogger. You are a blogger with over 1 million followers who devolve into a rabid cyber mob without any provocation, beyond your telling them to be enraged at someone. Also just a blogger for saying something that you disagreed with. Or you undermine a legitimate political candidate by spreading partial truths, manipulative narratives, incendiary sound bites, or just gross projections of your own toxic psyches because somebody online told you to do so. And yes, these folks are entitled to their vote too, regardless of what might be motivating their choices. That's democracy. Most of these voters are physically, emotionally, and intellectually removed from the flesh and blood consequences of their actions because they've been sheltered all their lives, first by their parents and then by educational institutions they were sent to become prepared to feign adulthood. And finally, by this really fucking bizarre alternate universe that allows and even encourages their basest impulses to go unchecked and unexamined, called social media. I mean, at least G Gordon Liddy owns his shit. He didn't hide in the dark behind a keyboard like a frightened child while he fucked you over. The unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates. Buddhist axiom: karma's only a bitch if you are, and she's coming for all of us. So consider what you're saying, because your soul depends on it.